Good afternoon, good afternoon. It's another Sunday afternoon, a little bit after 4. And again, we're in the man cave, right? Where all the men gather to reason about issues impacting men all over this country. As a matter of fact, we have some people from overseas as well. So we figure some of the issues are um, homogenic, and therefore they're impacting man everywhere, men everywhere. It's indeed a pleasure to be with you one more time. No, I need to get proper gears. So we're going to work on that. Today we're having a very special guest, a man who has the expertise to assist us to, make sense out of some of the issues that we are facing and why we are facing these issues. And of course, he is here to let us understand the importance of men taking care of their mental health. I always wonder why so much thing bad start with men, like menopause and, all these things. Everything is a man thing. Mental health, women mental or women mental whatever. What it's one of those things, and therefore it's something that we need to really look at. Mental health is not just about people eating up garbage man, because some people think that's what's all about. But it's about us, understanding some of the issues we are challenged with, and knowing how to treat with them. It's called mental illness, so it's an illness, and with that there should be a solution. Before we do the introductions, though, of our very special guest, I want to just share with you a quick quote from one of the books that I am, well, I have started it, I'm not yet completed it. And I said to you before, we are going to be reading. I want the men to start reading. I want men to start pursuing the things that would allow for them to become the man God created them to be, or to become the man that they need to become in order to operate efficiently and effectively within the space of their family. And this is a quote from the book Emotions. And of course, that was done by none other than T.D. Jakes. Spent a whole lot of time on the bestsellers list. And I think we should really read it. He basically looked at all of the emotional disposition that men face going through their different stages in life. It's a very interesting book, and something that, food for thought. So there's a quote from Patrick Morley, and it was on the state of men in America, right? It says, "Why are many Christian men so frustrated?" That was a question he asked. And then he answered. He said, "It is exactly because God has set eternity in our hearts, and we have a built-in sense that life um, does have meaning, rather. Life does have meaning, and our frustration is that we have not yet found it. We don't have enough religion to make us happy men as we look in the mirror, but we have enough to remind us how unhappy we have become. And therefore, that religion can be so, yeah, you know, put you in a kind of straitjacket, and all of the issues relating to those things can actually take you out of what you need to do, and you become frustrated. But it was food for thought, because you wonder, like in Jamaica, what's our state of being? Why are we the way we are? Is it the same reason that we have not yet found meaning for our lives? That is so important, and that we need to move forward. And if that's the case, then what stops us from going forward? If there is a space for men to go forward, what is stopping us from going forward? Is it that our minds are not made up? Is that we're not convinced? Is it that we need somebody to convince us that we are who we say we are? We need to find out. And at what time I think we'll find out. With research, we'll also get closer to the answers that we require. All right. I was about to go into the summary of last week, and I'm going to just do that quickly. I want to remember just a simple thing that we spoke about last week, because usually when we talk so much, you only remember about 17% of everything that was said. And that was immediately after. And then after a week or so, you might remember about 12%. And that is scientifically proven. Actually, read the research. It's after 2 weeks, you may remember about 12% of what you heard. However, if you went back through the document, if you went back through the podcast and listen and so on, you retain much more. Because I say when you participate, you retain more. That's why case studies and that kind of approach allow for you to remember much more than if you just listen to a lecture. Now, with that being said, I'm waiting for several persons to join. I'm not seeing all my usual cohorts yet. Nevertheless, we are going to push forward because we do have a time constraint, and we're going to maximize our time with Mr. And I'm trying to find um, something here that sometimes when you get to my age, see, sometimes you put some things up and then you realize you can't find it, and then all of that, become an issue. Okay, our special guest today is, of course, none other than Mr. Nesbitt, and I'm going to tell you who Mr. Nesbitt is. Mr. Christopher Nesbitt holds a Bachelor of Science in Psychology from the University of the West Indies, UWI Mona, and is currently a finalizing student in the Clinical Psychology Masters of Science program at the same institution. Yes, I did graduate from there too. He works as a clinical intern with Dr. Kai A.D. Morgan and Associates, where he administers psychological assessments and conduct psychotherapy. His approach to psychotherapy is rooted in the humanistic ideology of working collaboratively with clients in setting goals and taking steps towards achieving them in each session. He routinely seeks out opportunities to increase his breadth and depth of knowledge in both classical and contemporary techniques and strategies of therapy. This in the service of tailoring his treatment to the unique needs and preferences of each client. His interest lies specifically in trauma informed interventions from those having issues with processing past experiences. Very, very important focus. Very, very important and I want to emphasize that because a number of persons in Jamaica, including men and our boys, have been through trauma one way or the other. Either our father was just too strict and never understand that he could talk to it and put us to the whip or the hose or the electric wire or anything that the hand could, reach. Yes, we have been through some trauma. A number of us, we have come out on the other side, and therefore, when I saw that focus, I said, "This is an important man to know. This is a very important man to know." Yes, and this is where we're going to just jump right into it. Mr. Nesbitt, my good sir, it is extremely it's my pleasure. It's an extreme pleasure to have you with us today, sir. And of course, we're gonna let you talk because we wanted to talk about the whole issue of mental health and the importance of that, and why men don't want to go to no doctor, much as to go see a psychologist or sit on a reason, So we want to hear all about that, and what is it that we can do in order just to ensure that at the end of our process that we remain healthy mentally.
Yeah, actually, the pleasure is all mine, Mr. Prince. I want to thank you for that introduction. Thank you for bringing me into this, and thank you for kind of emphasizing the importance of trauma-informed intervention. I feel like a lot of us don't really know about it, and a lot of us don't really realize that. Or bringing up our childhood in Caribbean countries, a lot of time it can result in trauma. So I want to
Yes.
thank you for that. Really quickly, I wanted you to remind me of the narrow questions that you wanted to
All
start
right.
with, so we can go ahead
All
and make
right.
sure we're
We
maximizing
want to
that.
start with the general overview of mental health, particularly um, in Jamaica, right? And that would include everybody, but men specifically, because what I find is that we impact a number of things, or a number of things impact us, and we just hold it, we just 'cause man, man don't cry, man, man do a problem, man just we just link up a friend them and we just if I drink two beer, and some people they go to admit and all these things, and then we're good again. It is as if
Hmm.
persons don't expect men to have issues, mental, some serious mental challenges going up there, thinking about tomorrow, next day, or we're going to eat, or we're going to do this, or we're going to make, two ends meet, baby is on the way, and, whenever the two plan for that, all of these issues. The fact that some of us not working, the fact that, you're not working, but you still want partners, you still have to deal with those issues. Partners take money, partners take all kind of something, and we are just not prepared in a general sense for that. So the mental challenges, COVID and
Yeah,
everything else in between, that is brought to bear on the psyche.
yeah, and I think a lot of us, what we've realized, especially in the Caribbean environment, is that we put a lot of emphasis on the physical health. So, it's very obvious when like you have a broken leg or something in your body not working, you probably run to the doctor and they get that sorted out, you get that fixed, and you're like, all right, cool, I'm good now. But a lot of times we don't realize that there's a whole other aspect, a whole other dimension to our existence, and that's the mental health. when it comes to what's going on in our brains, what's going on in our heads, what's going on emotionally. And that's a word I know a lot of us men don't really enjoy, the emotions of things, you know. When it comes to those things, as a Caribbean nation, you know, we unfortunately suffer from neglecting those aspects of ourselves. Now I see that Becca had pulled up some questions on the right-hand side, so I kind of wanted to jump into at least one of those just to give a more concrete example. Sorry about that, something fell. Just to give a more concrete example of what this might look like and what it might look like with, you know, with what you had mentioned previously, a specific mental illness, and that would be depression, because depression is very common. It's one of the most, if not the most common mental illness there is. Right. So the first question I'm seeing on the screen is, how is depression manifested in men? And to understand and to answer that question, the first thing we're going to have to do is we're actually going to have to define depression. So depression is it's what we refer to as a mood disorder, meaning it's when your mood is not where it should be. It's not, you're not getting the whole range of emotions like you should, like you usually would. You maybe your old same vibrant self. When it comes to depression, there are at least 9 symptoms of depression, and what that could look like will vary a lot depending on a majority of factors, many factors, and that could include nine whole symptoms, and that could include your sex, your gender. So being a man, that can be one way in which depression manifests differently for you. So really quickly, we can just jump through these 9 symptoms, and then you can see how wide depression can be and how varied the presentation can be. So the first one that we usually see is what's clinically referred to as anhedonia. Now, that is when you don't enjoy the things you used to do. So, Mr. Prince, I can see you're a man that likes entertaining on a podcast. You like coming on, you like engaging the youths out there, and you like spreading the good word and the information. So if one day you get up and you realize, oh, I'm not really feeling this, that's fine. But if you get up every day for like maybe 2 weeks or so, and you realize you're not feeling this, you're not enjoying this anymore, your heart's not in it, that could be a sign that there's something that you might need to look a little bit deeper into. The other thing is dysphoria. That's just a really fancy way of saying sadness. So again, if you come onto this podcast and whereas you used to be vibrant, I see you're vibrant, your voice is, you command attention and everything, and you really engage in what it is that you're doing on this podcast. If you get up and you find that you're just sad, you're moping around all day, that again could be a sign that there's something a little bit deeper that you need to kind of get into. And those are the 2 cardinal symptoms. So those are kind of what are characteristic of a condition like depression. You have other symptoms that I'm kind of going to speed through because we don't want to spend all the time on symptoms. We want to get to, like, as you said, every illness has like a solution. We want to focus a little bit more on those solutions because these symptoms are something that you can look up, whereas the solutions are a little bit harder to come by. But the other symptoms you could find is you could find yourself losing weight, gaining weight without the express intent to do so. You could find yourself having difficulty concentrating. You could find yourself having difficulty just moving around. So, your energy loss has come about. You're fatigued. You don't have as much in the tank as you used to. You can have things such as psychomotor agitation, where you're literally physically moving a little bit slower or faster in some cases. You could have insomnia or hypersomnia, where you're sleeping too little or you're sleeping too much. You could have in the extreme cases, you could have thoughts of suicide, where you feel like you don't really belong in this world anymore and you really want to take your own life. So there's a really wide presentation that depression can have. And when it comes to us men, sometimes it can present a little bit differently, especially the way that we're socialized. Oftentimes we're not going to be saying, oh, I'm sad, oh, I'm down. What might happen is that expresses itself in like anger. You find that you're treating people a little bit differently. Maybe you're snapping a little bit more. It's whatever that stress response is for you. Sometimes depression can come out in that way. And the way that we're socialized is kind of difficult for us to then go and seek help. So that kind of brings us into like the next question. But before I jump into the next question, I want to give you kind of a little time to like let me know how you're digesting this. Tell me if you want me to clarify anything, because that's why I'm here, to have like a conversation with you.
Well, I guess. Well, I'm waiting on some of the men to come on and I've actually asked a question. But what you just express I think some of us, myself, let me use myself, might have reflected some of those symptoms,
Yeah.
So it might mean that I have a little challenge here. I need to take stock.
Get it checked out for sure.
Yeah, sometimes I really get shot. Sometimes I don't know. Sometimes being irritable, as we call it. You know, yeah, it kind of lingers longer than it would normal. And
Yeah.
sometimes you're very curt, you know, in your response to people, your family members, and so on. And that can be kind of debilitating. After a while, you ask yourself why. So why may I have answered so strong? Why did I have to say that?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. You think it might pass, but then very often you realize it not pass. You know, you're not past it. Like you think you'll get past it, but you're not past it because it happens
Mhm.
again and again. And then that now start to pose an even greater challenge because person now start take umbrage to that and start wondering, so what you change, so what I'm doing, also irritable, everything a quarrel. That sometimes not even quarrel, you just answer strong. But the fact of the matter
Mhm.
is it's impacting your relationship and how that the relationship go forward. So yeah, 9, I never know. I think you look depressed and just got it's got depression. But then
Yeah.
9, yeah, that whole,
Nine
the
symptoms.
whole
Yeah.
gamut of thing. Yeah.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah. So and
That's
then
we're
a
learning
lot of
some
times,
stuff.
yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was saying we're learning some stuff, So
Yeah, we're learning some stuff. That's yeah.
yeah, man. So it's good to know 9. So
Mhm.
something to think about and marinate. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And then when we talk about depression, oftentimes, a lot of us will think, oh, well, a lot of us will not realize that depression is one thing and all of us kind of get depressed. But when it becomes clinically significant is when you're having 5 or more of these symptoms and you're having them for at least 2 weeks long. And they're kind of causing you distress or they're causing your life to not function where it should function. And that's when it gets to a
Mm-hmm.
stage, and this is what people colloquially call depression, but that's when it gets to a stage where we diagnose major depressive disorder. And that's kind of what depression really looks like, if you want to use a fancier clinical term. Um, but yeah, it's funny that you should bring up the fact that your interactions get colored, and I know that was kind of feeding off of one of the examples I was giving. But one of the second question that we had come up here, I know some of your viewers are not necessarily viewing, but are only actually listening. One of the
Yeah,
actual
man.
questions that came up here, oh, thanks again, is that how do we identify and cope with these stressors? So I kind of wanted to jump into right right along how we identify these stressors. And you're going to realize that there are a lot of ways to identify these stressors, especially based on those 9 symptoms that I listed. And one of the ones we already mentioned already, those social situations, those social relationships that you share. If you realize that the people you're close to, you start acting a little bit differently around them, that could be a reason to get to check up, maybe see a psychologist, see a therapist, speak to a friend that might be more familiar with the mental health field, and kind of get to the bottom of that. Because what I like to liken it to, especially when I'm talking to some other guys, is like it's your car. Your body is like your car. Your mind is like a car. And if you're driving your car and everything is good and dandy, you're not going to necessarily go and get it serviced. But if you start hearing new sounds, hearing new creaks, you drop into a pothole and maybe the car is shaking a little bit more than usual, you're going to bring your car to go get service. So your mind is a lot like that. It's like if you're realizing that, maybe you and your girlfriend are always having it out and you're always getting upset over these petty arguments, or you're one of the big ones is social isolation. If you realize that you no longer want to spend any time with any of your friends or any of your family, and maybe they haven't really done anything to you, that's when you can kind of see that there might be something going on there. So when you see that change happening and that change is happening for the negative and your social relationships are suffering, that could be a very big indicator that you're undergoing some amount of stress. One of the other things that you can realize is your inner experience. So what's going on the inside of you, that's also a very important metric. So if you realize that you're constantly having these thoughts of, for example, the one I had given where it gets pretty serious, your depression, you're having these thoughts of death, you're having these thoughts of, I'm not worth anything, I am unlovable. Maybe you're feeling these guilty feelings. That can be an indicator that something's going on as well. So you kind of need to know what your own mind is like and kind of cultivate an awareness around that. And when you start seeing different things popping up and you start seeing a pattern, a theme of like sadness or self-deprecation where you're just putting yourself down all the time, insulting yourself, that again could be something that's growing into something a little bit bigger. Um, yeah. So that social and that emotional, those are things that are very big indicators when it comes to depression. But another thing that a lot of us will not necessarily pick up on right away is probably your environment. So how are you leaving things? Is your house now a massive mess and you just don't have the energy to get up and clean it? Things like that. Mr. Prince, you sound like a hit on nerve. But yeah.
Garrett parts everywhere. Everywhere, man. Garrett parts are so. Yeah.
But another thing we can jump into, I see you have a very well-groomed beard here now, Mr. Prince. So that's another thing we can jump into. If you start neglecting your grooming, I see you dress smartly, you have your tie and everything. Things are going on here.
No, but let's come on church, man. Let's go on church.
Things like that, that could be another indicator. So these are signs you can see from the outside as well as symptoms that you can see from the inside. You know? And I don't want to leave us all with these 9 terrible symptoms you have to look out for and social situations that might be bringing you down and environments. I want to leave us all on a positive note. And I'm not leaving right now, but you know what I mean. The way to kind of go about coping with these things, firstly, is kind of set yourself up for resilience. So again, going back to that car analogy, when you have your car, you're not going to wait until it's not starting, the engine is blocked up. You're not going to wait until all sorts of problems start popping up before you're going to get it serviced. You know, you drive 5,000 miles, you're going to get your car serviced. It's a very similar thing when it comes to your mind. You want to make sure that you're doing things that you enjoy. You want to make sure that you're taking time for yourself and engaging in what we like to call self-care. You want to make sure that you're making time for yourself, carrying out your hobbies. So you, Mr. Prince, you want to make sure that you have time to do that research you're talking about, that you have time to sit down and invite your guests and start your podcast. You want to make sure that you have time to clean up your beard and all those things. You want to make sure that you make space for yourself. Because what will happen, and us as men, you know, we pride ourselves in being providers and these things, and oftentimes we'll throw ourselves into work and forget the grooming, forget the time for myself. And I don't need that. I need to provide for my family, and that's a recipe for disaster. You need to set up routines in which you're taking care of yourself, whether that be physically, whether I myself, I'm watching F1 and F1 documentary right now, and I'm enjoying the hell out of it. You need to make time to enjoy yourself. And that also is not only in like activities such as maybe going out and partying with your friends or enjoying a nice dinner, cooking a meal. It's also things like physical exercise. And I know we've all heard this before, but physical exercise is probably the closest thing we can get to a magic bullet for every illness. Physical exercise is going to help you mentally, obviously physically. So that's something you definitely want to throw into your routine if you can. And that doesn't mean you have to go to the gym and deadlift 80 kilograms, 6 reps, 6 times a week. That's not necessarily what exercise has to look like. There you go. You know, it can look like just getting out, getting some sun, walking for maybe 10 minutes. It's nothing difficult, nothing monumental, but getting yourself active. We're humans, we're human beings, and we need to get out and kind of make sure that we're still moving, because use it or you lose it. So that's what that can look like in the long term. But then a lot of times we're like, yeah, man, that's well and good. But if I'm in a major depressive episode right now and I don't feel like getting up and maybe going outside and all those things, what do I do? If I'm in like an acutely stressful situation, how do I cope? What do I do? You know, I'm not looking for these long-term kind of situations. I need something to help me right now. And what can really help in those situations is what we refer to as grounding techniques. So it could be that you're getting lost in your mind, getting lost in your thoughts, getting lost in just the overwhelm of what life can be, because life just these days can be very difficult. And when it comes to grounding, you kind of want to take yourself out of your own head and put yourself back into the environment. And we have 5 senses which we can interact with the environment with. So you can just look around and see what you can see, listen, see what you can hear, see what you can maybe taste, what you can smell, what you can touch. And oftentimes we forget that we're wearing clothes. So it's very simple. It can be something as simple as recognizing that, you know, your shirt is pulling on certain aspects of yourself. But you want to bring yourself back to the present, because a lot of times these mental illnesses, they're mental. A lot of times they're up in your head. And that's not to minimize it and say, oh, just think positively. But getting stuck in your head oftentimes can give these mental conditions a little bit more power, as opposed to realizing that you're a being and you exist in a present space and you exist in an environment and you can kind of take notice of all of that. I think I saw you had a question there, Mr. Prince. You can kind of jump in time.
No, I just said, because as I said, some people, I think when people are not grounded, you know, you don't have a plan. You never thought you need a plan, because I know a person who have been there. and they get real down, but yet still they never, when you question them, they never really do the things that they need to do in order to have this kind of routine, this thing looking forward to, and how they would get there. Like everybody wants to be rich, but how you going to get there? Everybody wants a car, but how you
Yeah.
going to get it?
Yeah.
And so we just say, boy, we don't want a car, man, and want a high-end car, want a Audi. But then
Mhm.
nobody thinks about, well, not nobody. Some person don't really think about how they would. I want a Hardy. Oh, I'll go get an Hardy. What's the first thing I need to think about getting a Hardy? What do I need to do to buy a Hardy? What that kind of thing. Um, and I guess if the reality outstrip your expectation, then you really
Mhm.
gonna have a gap in that middle space there, and that would cause you to be probably not be so happy over time because you really never consider it. You never consider those issues. But wow.
Precisely.
Just
And you
thinking, I'm
brought
just
up,
thinking about, yeah, just thinking about something.
yeah, yeah. And you
Yeah,
brought
yeah.
up a very good point, actually. A lot of times we'll find ourselves in these situations because we get so overwhelmed by everything. And that's because we probably don't have a plan. So when you find yourself in a situation where you're very stressed out, one of the things that we as men kind of jump to is problem solving. And problem solving, the first step in problem solving is breaking it down. So as you said, if you want a high-end car, well, what's the first step towards getting a high-end car? You need to break it down as simple as possible. Kind of set yourself up for success. Make it as small, as bite-sized, as easy as it possibly can be, and that's kind of how you build routines. So that can be how you attack a problem that's stressing you out and consistently stressing you out, by breaking it down to smaller pieces, and then realizing that you can start small and continue small, and those small things will add up. Because a lot of times we will be making progress and we'll get frustrated at the fact that, oh, I don't have the high end car yet, and it's like, slow down, relax, you'll get it, but it might take
Yeah.
some time and it's going to take some investment, and you need to break down the steps and realize that the problem isn't one big monolithic problem. It's made of smaller parts that you can kind of engage with. Yeah. So
So,
in terms of that, no,
I,
one of
yes,
the
well, before you continue, I hope the gentleman, some person might be watching on YouTube. I really would want
Mhm.
them on this platform so they could ask some questions. Um, but I hope that they're hearing what you're saying because
Mhm.
usually we try to eat an elephant whole when we just need to eat in one mouthful at a time. Different
Mhm.
serving size, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and we'll get there eventually.
Yeah,
So I hope you're listening because I'm listening, and I tell you there are some stuff that I even need to even reevaluate myself. So um, thank you for that. But we can proceed, my good sir. We're learning. We're in
right.
school. School is into the men.
Sure. Yeah, man. And if you feel like there's because I'm not seeing any questions right now, but if you feel like there's any questions that any of the viewers might have, feel free to jump in and ask them. Um, but yeah, one of the things that we're really good at as men is problem solving. So sometimes people come to us and they'll have a problem, and we'll kind of jump straight into problem solving mode. It's like, oh well, you could do this, or you could do that, or you could do this. And that's not to say it's a bad thing, but there's a whole other approach to problems that we can kind of take, and that's emotion focused coping. So a lot of times we neglect doing that. We'll jump straight into trying to solve the problem and don't realize that us ourselves, we're not, to use a word I used before, we're not grounded. We're not really in a situation where we feel stable. We're just apprehensive, and maybe a lot of anxiety is coming up, and we're kind of just pushing, 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 and white knuckling everything. And it's like, but bottling it up, as you had said previously before. And emotion focused coping kind of works on getting that, when you bottle everything up, kind of just finding a way to take it all out, unpack it, process it. And I think as men, especially in the Caribbean culture, we're not oftentimes taught how to do that emotional processing. So what that might look like, and this sounds kind of simple, but what that might look like is just simply taking a breath. Yeah, taking a breath is a really good one actually, and also just acknowledging what you're feeling. Um, Acknowledge it without judging it. So a lot of times we'll say, "Oh, I feel sad. That's a terrible emotion." No, just acknowledge what you're feeling is a very good step towards emotion focused coping. And acknowledging that could just be like, "Well, I realize that I'm feeling this emotion," or you could say, "I'm feeling this emotion in my chest." Maybe my chest feels tight, maybe my legs feel tight. Wherever you hold stress, a lot of times people hold stress in their shoulders. So just taking a quick body scan of how you're feeling and where you're feeling it, that can be a very good emotion-focused coping style, because you become aware of it. And harkening back to that analogy with the car, you're not going to know what the problem is or the mechanic isn't going to know what the problem is if you can't at least tell him what the problem is, you know? So you want to be listening to your car basically, and realizing what the new sounds might be and what sounds you're used to, what sounds are new. That way, when you want to kind of go about solving it, you kind of know what it's all about. You're aware of it and it's not blindsiding you. So that we've kind of gone through problem focused, we've gone through emotion focused, and there are two more things that I kind of want to touch on, and then really it would have been my piece, and I'm going to open it up to questions if we have any. But one more is asking for help. So it's great to tap into your emotions. It's great to problem solve with a situation. But one of the things that women don't like to do, myself included, is ask for help. We don't like to say, all right, perhaps, maybe I might be struggling. And really, you're only doing yourself a disservice. And if you feel as though you're going to be a burden to somebody else, I think one of the best ways to reframe that is to say, well, instead of you trying to solve the problem all on your own, give somebody else a chance to help you. Because I know that as men, when we help somebody, like say there's somebody stranded on the side of the road with a flat tire, and you pull over and you have the lug nuts and you know to change the tire, and you change the tire, and you're on your way, you feel good. So giving somebody that opportunity to help you is not a sign of weakness. It could just be that you're kind of lending and giving somebody an opportunity to feel as if they have that purpose. And it kind of reminds me of that passage that you read in the beginning, where it was like, what's our purpose? A lot of people feel that their purpose is to help others. So if you want to just help others that way, help others help you. And it's a good way to kind of reframe it when we think that we might be burdening other people. But asking for help is a very important thing. And you'd be surprised how many people would kind of are stumbling over each other trying to help you because of everything that you've done for them. Oh, I see Paul Clark is saying that he's enjoying the exchange so far. Thanks, Paul. Thank you. And the last thing I'm going to touch on before we kind of hand it over to people like Paul so they can ask questions is transcendence. Now, that's just really a fancy way of saying put it on God. A lot of people, that might have shocked them because they don't expect a psychologist to come in here and start talking about religion. And psychology and religion aren't diametrically opposed. We're not two opposing ends, you know. Your psychologist isn't going to say, oh, don't put it on God, because faith is a very powerful coping tool, you know? And that faith doesn't have to look like Christianity. That faith could be, maybe you just have a faith in karma. Maybe you have a faith in the universe, but kind of accepting that you're in the situation that you're in and putting it on maybe a higher being, or putting it on maybe just the pattern of the universe, or whatever intelligent design that you believe in. That can be a very good way to cope. Because it's kind of putting it onto something a little bit bigger than yourself, you know, and that's a very good way to cope. That's kind of my piece, and I really want to hear from the listeners and kind of get an idea of what I might have missed, what maybe they're a little bit more curious about, because I'm excited to talk about these things all the time.
Yeah, yeah, man, for real. Gentlemen, the line is open. If you so desire, you may ask a question. I have one question.
Of course.
And I have this long time. It's this. Do we become more emotional, or are we more predisposed to stress through emotions the older we get, or when we go through certain seasons in life? So, for example, when you're a man at 45, 50, and you're going through andropause, do you manifest these things, or do these things impact you more than when you were younger? Are you more predisposed to that kind of thing? And none of us would have been, old enough, married long time and all these things. 50, everybody in doing the park, every man in doing the park that I come and see is 50-year-old. So it's be an old man. Last time we had a party, we had an old man party. Everybody say, oh, old age, 52, 55, 6, 7, all these things.
Yeah.
So, I suppose we might suffer from similar situation, but I want to know the season of the life that you're in, if you're more predisposed to some things. So that's one of the questions I would like to ask, Does this andropause, because they say them have menopause, we can't say womenopause. So we have our next man of pressure, andropause. Yeah. So, andropause bugging us out. Does that cause us to be, more predisposed to the kind of stress and depression and all these things that, we're talking about. Cause he's a one man, I know I'm feel like something. After we talk about, me, I'll feel it. So I don't want to be depressed and all these things. You know? I'm gonna check myself
Right.
serious.
Yeah. All right. So that question is kind of twofold. I think as we're children, as we're younger in that life cycle, it's that we're a little bit more susceptible to those things. But the thing about children is that they're resilient. So you might find ways to kind of just deal with it because as children, we only really have one life view at that point. We might talk to our friends, but we don't really meds how they're living life. So we think that the way that we're living life is the only way to live life. And if you're thinking that this is the only way to live life, you're going to find a way to cope with it. So it could be, and generally what you will see is that we will hold on to these ways of coping throughout our lives. And as we get older, what will happen is we would have stuffed our bottle so much of all these emotions and everything that maybe has been stressing us out, and we're not asking anybody for help. We're not going to get checked out by anybody. We're just going to white knuckle it and get through it on our own. And the longer you do that, is the more stuff gets bottled down, and the longer you bottle stuff up, is the more the pressure builds, is the more it kind of comes out. So it could be a case, and it really depends from individual to individual. But generally, what we'll see is as we get older, especially as the testosterone leaves our system, well, we have less of it, especially in older age. It might be that these emotional problems, they have a little bit more space to come up because their coping mechanisms stop working as well. And the testosterone and that urge, that drive, that fight or flight, just that war mentality might just break down a little bit as we get older, especially after we meet a lot of other people and their walks of life may be different, and we have all these maybe girlfriends and other romantic relationships and female friendships that we're in. You're going to be exposed to so many other ways of living that year. As you get older, you're probably going to break down those defenses and those old coping styles. You're going to be looking for new ways to live because you realize that I can't keep doing this. So yeah, short answer, yes, it does become a little bit more, you do become a little bit more emotional as you grow older, I would say. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sir Paul, I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you see, Sir Paul, question? I have a question. I get really angry sometimes when I'm on driving on the road, like I'm on bad driving him on the road, or I'm expressing something. Oh, it's come up, it's up. You can see that? Okay.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Simply
I
don't
see
get it.
Paul,
You know what I mean?
these situations are a sign of. Wait, you wanted to read it out? Go ahead. Yeah.
Not necessarily. I'm expressing
Okay,
something
right.
and the other person simply just don't get it. Is the anger a sign of mental illness? To be quite frank, sometimes I'm short and if you explain something 2 and 3 and 4 times, I'm like Paul to some degree. You said to a man some simple things. If you put the log tool right there and you do this 2 times in the
Yeah.
jack, it must go up, And I say,
Yeah.
I don't understand. You say, okay, just put it like this, and you show him, and you draw my diagram.
Right.
I still don't understand. Sometimes kind of wear you out, Virgin,
Yeah.
right, Virgin elephant. I mean, yeah, that kind of thing. So I don't know. You got answer, Paul. I don't know
Yeah, man.
because
Of
I feel that
course.
way sometimes.
The thing that a lot of people don't realize about mental illness is that all of it is born of something normal, something natural. So we're not going to say, oh, just because they get angry in a situation, that means that you have disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. That's not how it works. When you might have a problem, when you might have a mental illness, is when it's whatever reaction you're going about, whatever emotional state you're in, whatever problem it is that you're having mentally. When you might have a problem, a diagnosable illness, something clinically significant, is when it's doing one of two things or both things. When it's causing you distress, so it's a case where you just cannot live this way anymore. It's bothering you. You think about it all the time. It's upsetting you. It's a day-to-day occurrence. It's a pattern. It's something you see coming out consistently. Because that's what we do as psychologists. We look for patterns. If you see it's a pattern, it's something that really bothers you, then that could be a sign that there's something a little bit deeper. And then the other thing is impairment. So a lot of times we don't realize that maybe the way we're acting is a bit strange, is a bit is causing a little bit of issues, and impairment kind of comes from the outside looking in, whereas distress is from the inside looking out. So impairment is when the way you live your life is no longer, you can't do it anymore. So I kind of like to compare this to, like, let's say you have a broken leg. You have a problem when you can't walk anymore. is similar in terms of the mental illness space. You know, you have a problem when you can't live your life properly anymore. So to give an example, there is a condition known as agoraphobia. That's when you don't want to leave your house because you're very afraid that something bad is going to happen when you go outside of the house. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, I don't want to leave the house because I might catch in a car crash, and you think that once out of the month and it doesn't stop you from leaving your house, you're probably fine. But if you think that 5 days out of the week and you're not leaving your house for most of your life anymore, then we have a problem. So just to answer your question, Paul, if a man bad drive you on the road and you're upset, is probably not a problem. Everybody is going to get upset over that. That's upsetting. I get upset over that. And if you're explaining something to someone and they just don't get it, that is frustrating. Me and Mr. Prince both understand how frustrating that can be. The issue might be if, like, everything you explain, somebody don't get it and you just blow off the handles and you slap a man in his face. That might be when the issues come in, when it's causing distress to you or it's causing impairment in your life. That's kind of the hallmarks. I think Anthony has a question now. Yeah, Anthony's kind of just agreeing with what I said about working out. It's a really good tool to free your mind, and as you said, just being outside and taking in the environment, because people forget that when it all comes down to it, we're animals. And if you own a pet, you know that animals have biological needs, and we do have biological needs. Some of that is sun. Some of that is making sure that your muscles are actually doing the job of muscles. Some of that is just taking in the outside, realizing that maybe we live in a concrete jungle, but there are plants outside. Go experience the breeze. And then freeing your mind is something that's really important as well. And if anybody who is listening ever plays music, or you're doing work and you kind of you get into that flow, that's a very good indicator that things are kind of going well, at least up here. If you can actively get into flow, or you can just find a way to stay in the present, that's kind of a symbol of mental health. And that's something that we should all work towards. And that's why you'll kind of hear psychologists preaching the gospel of meditation. It's a really good way to make sure that things are kind of flush out your system and make sure that your thoughts are aligned and that everything's kind of going good.
All right. I have another question. I find from time to time, well, the older I get, is that I retreat into myself. I'm not afraid of the road, to be quite frank. I actually go on the road sometimes just to, just to, with the environment, just to socialize, just to watch people go about their business and so on. But it can become so bad that the people who you live with, you're not interacting with them on the level that you used to interact before. Yeah? Mm-hmm. And so sometimes the intimacy is not there because they're not interacting at that level. Because there's so much on your mind, there's so much that you're trying to process. And sometimes people don't understand that you're just trying to process some things. You're really not on top of the whole game, but you want to just process the things to break it down so that you can understand it in the fullness of the situation, piece by piece, but persons would want you to do otherwise. And then you retreat into yourself. So you actually spend a whole lot of time with yourself. Is that a good or a bad thing? Because what I find that, I can spend a whole lot of time with myself. No, I cannot spend a whole lot of time with a whole lot of reasoning, read a book, don't necessarily want to exchange so much conversation. Because sometimes you're afraid that it might become an argument. So you basically immerse yourself into a book, read and learn a whole lot more. Even something that you don't necessarily even know. How to sow, how to make some plants grow, how to, or not to waste the ends of the scallion. You can put them in a little cup and you figure, say, those are not necessarily things that but you find immersing yourself in those things kind of keep you away from some, because although you like people, you don't necessarily want them to be in your space and face. And then sometimes you feel like there's some amount of sensory deprivation taking place, but then you still like your own company.
Yeah.
Is that meant? Because I do this a lot of time. A lot of times I go to some of these things, and I sometimes question myself whether or not it is healthy, to be honest. But I say, boy, it's better admit yourself than being an argument to somebody who are foolishness. So you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So sometimes just chill with yourself. You know what I mean? So Is that okay? Is that okay though, or it doesn't mean that some changes will have to be made, so I can go forward at least the way I used to go forward?
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I think when it comes to these kinds of questions, there's no one size fits all. So it really, and that's a very cop out answer, but it really is dependent on the individual. So it depends on what you enjoy and what you envision for your life. And what you will realize is that two things. Generally, if you're going to make a decision based out of avoidance or fear or anxiety, it probably and it might be a bad decision to make. I mean, there are exceptions. So, like if you're at the edge of a cliff and you don't want to walk any closer, that's probably a good decision to make. But also, you don't envision falling off a cliff for the rest of your life. So it really kind of vacillates between those two. What kind of life do I expect to see, or what kind of life do I envision for myself? And am I making these decisions out of avoidance? And if the answer to this is yes, I'm making these decisions out of avoidance, and you can kind of relegate to that last question, which is, well, does this kind of help to move my life to where it wants to be? And if the answer to that last question, no, it doesn't move my life to where I want it to be. If the answer to that question is no, then you might have a problem on your hands and you might need to make changes. Because, and it really kind of, I love that you read that passage at the beginning of the podcast, that one about the purpose. You know, if something aligns with your life's purpose, it's probably a good chance that you're okay doing that. So if staying inside and processing everything that you have to process and reading a book about growing certain plants is the life that you want for yourself and you are at peace living that way, then I can't, with a right mind, good conscience, diagnose you with anything, because that's just the life you want to live. At the same time, though, if you find that you are staying inside because you're afraid of having arguments, or maybe you're afraid of going out there and interacting with others, then it's probably not such a good idea. And you need to kind of just reevaluate. And if it's moving you away from that life that you want to build, again, that's probably going to be a bad idea as well. Because what people neglect to realize a lot of times, these mental problems that arise, they're just another way for your body to tell you that something's going wrong right now. And maybe it's a case that you need to reevaluate and make sure that you're still on track and still accomplishing or moving towards what you hope to attain throughout your life. Yeah.
Interesting.
Very long-winded answer, but the best answer I have.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. You know, any other question? All right. Until somebody put up a question. The environment. I don't know. I have a tendency to sit and look and try to evaluate some stuff that's happening around me. So, for example, in recent times, I've noted that for a number of our young men in particular, there are several things that happen. They do, right? So, for a number of young men, in recent times, I realized that a number of them actually prefer to ride a bike than to save and buy a car, right? I suppose the cost might be a factor there, but the bike and the bike is usually modified to annoy everybody else who don't ride bike, you know. So the muffler is, you know, and everything is on the muffler thing, and it's like it's a joy for them right to 12 minutes, that kind of something, you know what I mean? And I say, oh my gosh, 12 minutes, I just get a little doze off and just wake me up. And then there is this kind of haste. It's like everybody is in a rush, you know. A taxi man going to stop right in front of you, and you are like 2 car lengths before the bus stop, and I'm going to stop there, so I'm just going and stop and gone again, and even you pass him, I'm going to try to pass again to stop at the next bus stop. And I say, but you know, he's on time. Is that like say, you know, he have to be doing that, but it's another thing. Recently, I realized people don't stop at stoplight anymore. I realize that people, when the stoplights are red, people take the opportunity, 3-4 cars, for go through the red light. That's like a regular thing. Bike men don't, people who ride bike don't stop at no sign at all. And then I keep saying, why are we rush? It's like there's this unholy rush to get to nowhere fast, you know? But we're just rushing. And I keep wondering if if that is impacting on me, because, you know, I seem to be going slower. Probably I need to speed up. I don't know, but it seemed to be something seemed to be causing us to be moving faster than we would normally move. and it's not healthy. I want to lick down and bike, mash up people and broke foot and all these things. The figure say, would I learn some lesson and just slow down? But the fact of the matter is we're not. Um, what would you say? What would you suggest? Because to me, it seems like the environment is either conducive to that, or it's just something else happened that we're just not seeing or just not in control of. But it seems like we're just moving faster than normal, and it is not to get to anything expeditious. Like, if I don't reach, then the plane can leave me. Um, do you think that have some significant impact on how we are processing things now? Because as an older man, we get annoyed easy when missing everything there. That's the truth.
Yeah. No, I get that. I feel like I'm on both sides of that, because at one point I did want a bike for those exact reasons, so I can weave through traffic and get where I need to get quickly. So I'm on both sides, but I also see from your perspective where it's like, why are you risking your life for that? That doesn't make sense. So on the one hand, I think, and you did mention young men, so when we're younger, when we're my age, so I'm kind of in the thick of it right now. I'm gonna bring it back to kind of biology and then kind of make my way upwards. We do have a lot more testosterone, so we're going to be more inclined to be more impulsive, to try and take up as much space, to prove to everybody that we have the skills. So the taxi man is on the road and he's showing, yeah, man, but I'm the king of the road though. I can do what I want. You're all going to drive around me. And we also have what's called what is it, man? I learned this a couple of years back. But I'm going to paraphrase what it is. Really, it's this sense that we're invincible. A lot of us, especially when we're maybe on the bikes, when we're in the taxi, we don't feel as if anything can go wrong, because we've done it so many times before, and I've done it and it's been successful. Therefore, I'm fine and I'll forever be fine. And it takes hitting rock bottom or hitting a truck or something to get that mortality kind of beaten back into us. But especially in our younger years, when we maybe haven't faced any adversity, so maybe we haven't had like a cancer scare, we haven't passed maybe a kidney stone, our body hasn't had time to break down yet. We feel as if we are the exception. We feel as if we are the first person that's going to cheat death. So that can be one of the reasons, especially biologically there. The other thing is that doing these things is exciting. It gives you a rush, and that rush can be addictive. And especially in today's society, and kind of bringing it societal now, we prioritize and we kind of put on a pedestal just being efficient, getting things done quickly. So if your boss gives you something to do, you want to get it done the next second. You want to do it as quickly as possible. And usually there's a monetary incentive to do that. So if the taxi man was supposed to take him time, he's probably going to earn $100,000 less than if he had sped up. So there's a little bit of that going on, where society at large is kind of rewarding these quick, efficient, immediate gratification kind of things. And you can see that spreading from things as wide as driving to, like, people get a phone, if they open an app, if they press the button on the app to open and the app doesn't open in 3 seconds, automatically frustrated. That's kind of where we're moving to as a society. But when we get older, we kind of gain a little more perspective. And it's like, do I really want to run a red light and risk being T-boned by like a truck and dying just to get somewhere maybe a minute faster? Because you gain that perspective and you're like, no, that doesn't make any sense. But it takes a little while for that. First of all, it takes time for that testosterone to leave our body. Second of all, a lot of us, especially before the age of 25, there's a part of your brain that's not fully developed called the prefrontal cortex, and that is responsible for making sure that you can control your impulses. So until the age of 25, most of us, our prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed, so we don't fully have the biological capacity to not do those impulsive things. And as you can imagine, as young men with the testosterone at the highest point it will ever be in your life, that's a recipe for disaster. So yeah.
I hope you're listening. I hope you're listening. Yes. Wow. But that is that for both men and women, or that just for men? The development of the prefrontal cortex.
That's for everyone. The prefrontal cortex is for everyone, but the testosterone is specific to men. Anthony has a question here that's popped up on screen. So
Yes.
mental issues, illness, and awareness wasn't really popular in Jamaica a few years back. I remember growing up, we as a society in Jamaica didn't pay much attention to mental issues / awareness. Do you believe the lack of attention given to this matter has significantly impacted how we as a society behave? I do think so, because if you remember a little bit earlier in the conversation when I was saying that the first step towards emotion-focused coping is to acknowledge what it is that you're feeling. If you don't acknowledge something, and again, bringing it back to that car analogy, if you don't realize that there's a sound going on and you need to get that sorted out, nothing's going to change. So I do think that we're a little bit behind the curve in case of increasing mental health awareness. And I do think that because we haven't given it as much time as it has deserved, that is why we're seeing a lot of the issues that we're seeing right now. But that's unfortunate. But at the same time, we are taking steps to make sure that we're more aware. Like this podcast, for example. We're all here, we're participating in it, whether we are hosting like Mr. Prince, speaking like me, commenting like Paul and Anthony. So awareness is increasing. So while I am disappointed that we didn't do this earlier, I'm elated that we're finally getting around to doing it. But it's like anything. It's like if you go to the gym, it's like if you're picking up a new hobby, it's going to take practice, it's going to take time, and it's going to take deliberate attention and consistency. But I do think that it does have a big contribution to how society behaves because, once you start educating the society at large about things like what I just described, the prefrontal cortex, the impulsivity, the testosterone, once you have a better understanding for that, you gain a little bit more perspective. It's kind of like aging. You gain more experience and you realize that maybe the things that were initially important aren't the best for you, and you kind of realize how to move forward and kind of stay on that path of mental, physical, spiritual, whatever you want to call it, wellness, just holistic wellness. But we'll get there.
We'll get there. As I just spoke and as I heard Anthony question, Vision 2030 came up in my mind, and I'm always one. I am what they call now. I am idealistic, So there are some things that I really, really hope I experience in my lifetime. And there are some things that I think, as a nation, we can inculcate to at least make the nation better. But in all of those conversations, what I find is this: in the early stage in those conversations, issues like these were not discussed. Yeah. So we really wanted Jamaica to be a place to live, grow a family, do business, all that. But then the other part, the part that's supposed to drive it, the part that should become the impetus for this greater Jamaica, we never really get into the nitty-gritty. We get into the economic part as if the economic part was the only answer to the question. But as you was at least you speak, and I remember when I was younger, and some of the crazy things that we used to do too. Michael, I used to ride a bike too. I lost it when a man robbed me. A man actually take me on a bike and he cut that man. But the fact of the matter is, it makes sense. It kind of makes sense. But then in my mind, because we're doing so much of the negative things in this period when our prefrontal cortex is not fully developed, then I am also no worried now, because when you come out of that phase, you might come out of that phase kind of warped. And I tell you what I mean by that. I really don't have a challenge with them legalizing, marijuana. Right? I never have a challenge with it, because I say if it's natural, then it's natural. It's really how we treat it and use the thing, right? But then I am now looking at young men using the thing. And when I say using it, means if as early as man you can see them roll up a thing and then have a grass a boom. Now the boom is a upper and the weed is a down. Like boom, rum and boom. You know what I mean? Boom carry up, rum carry down, and they're going in both directions at the same time. And you have like a split, and I suppose that to balance out the thing. You know what I mean? But if during the period of our underdeveloped prefrontal cortex, and we are indulging deep in those things and adding things like grabber to it. Well, I'm not sure. Well, you're a decent young man, probably don't know about these things. But so you add grabber, things like alligator to the weed, and you're drinking the boom and everything in your body one time. Over time, and this is just my belief. I didn't do any scientific research for this, but I said over time it must impact on the development of your mental capacity, because it's like you put yourself in a state of you're going in two directions at the same, like you're burning a candle at both ends. And then no, at the end of that, most of those young men, they're satisfied with those. And I'm not saying that everybody going to become a doctor or whatever, you know. But I'm saying it's like there's no impetus, there's no old people are there's no ambition. Yes, they just want to do a little hustle. They just want to do a little hustle. They just want to make $2 and we're good. Yes, I mean, just want to make enough to buy an X-Swift, buy a Guinness, go to eat a food, and that seemed to be enough for a number of persons, even after they would have come out of this period where their prefrontal cortex was not fully developed. And so they're coming into manhood now, and then so they're supposed to be coming into manhood, but then them coming with all of this baggage and impact and all them things happening. I don't know, could you provide just a general discourse on how you think that is impacting, if it's indeed impacting, because I believe it's impacting on us and our productivity as a nation, and therefore I know it's not scientific, but I figure you being a scientist, you should be able to shed a little more light on how that works.
Yeah.
Is that
any
mouthful?
substance? No, I understand, and it's a rightfully said mouthful that had to be said. But our body likes stability. Our body likes to keep things in the order that they are. So if you're putting a lot of these substances into your body while your body is still developing, it could be a case where your body's like, oh, so if I'm always going to have cannabis, then I'm going to kind of just make sure that I develop around the assumption that cannabis is always going to be in my system. Now, I'm not going to jump into the nitty-gritty of the biological ramifications of smoking cannabis from you being really young, like in adolescence, because that's not my area of expertise, and I don't want to say anything that's incorrect. But what I do know for a fact is that all of these substances, whether it be boom, grab out with your weed, anything like that, they're ways to cope, And if we start from a very young age, maybe at the age of 16, and anytime something like an intense emotion, like maybe sadness or extreme anger, anytime anything like a discomfort and an uncomfortable inner experience happens to us, and our first indication, our first line of action is to reach for a spliff, roll a spliff, grind up some weed, and just smoke it off, that is not a coping mechanism that's going to be conducive for the rest of your life. Now, it's one thing if you smoke like every now and again, like, I mean, we're in Jamaica, we have some of the best weed, obviously. But it's another thing if, as you said, first thing in the morning, you roll a spliff and smoke it. Coping with stress and finding these, what we call maladaptive coping mechanisms, it isn't going to help you in the long run, because you then don't know how to regulate yourself outside of these substances. And it could lead you to a cycle where it's just like, because people will say that you can't get addicted to cannabis. That's not true. You can get addicted to almost anything. I'm not going to demonize cannabis alone. You can get addicted to almost anything. There are very few things you can get addicted to. So once you start introducing these types of coping mechanisms and these crutches earlier on, you realize that people can't function without them. And if all they're thinking of is maybe just kind of going through that cycle, getting to their coping mechanism so they can stay in that comfort zone, you can kind of see how that's going to impact their ambition. Now, that's not saying that everybody who smokes cannabis is going to end up like that, but it is a possibility. And it is something that I think we should be aware of and realistic about. I'm not sure if I fully answered the question, but you can always ask.
Yeah, man, I think you're fully ventilated. Nicely. One more, I'm still waiting on some more questions now. I'm not getting much, but yes, but one more question from me. Mm-hmm. All right. The older, how do I put this now? I'm trying to frame it proper. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We go through a number of changes, right? The older we get, a number of changes. Some of those changes unearth some things that really we thought we had buried. Yes?
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. What I find in my older age, is that my long-term memory is much sharper than my short-term memory. Yes? So some things
Yeah.
that happened long time that I never remember that I remember. You know what I mean? Like 40 years, I remember this. It comes to me very clearly. So my long-term memory is kind of getting a little more active. Now, if trauma was a part of that, if trauma was a part of that, how do I deal with it? Because I would, in my mind, I would have lived my life. I am so over the hill. But then these things are happening. These things are coming. I am thinking. These thoughts are returning, and they're bringing some emotional punch with it. Yes.
Mhm.
Um, should one seek to get therapy, or do we use the same kind of burial mechanism that we did for those emotional discomfort that we had when we were younger, to basically put it back to bed? How do we cope with some of those things? Because, and I ask, because I realize some of those things also impact on our relationship between our wives and our children. And
Yes.
therefore, how do we adequately, properly address some of those issues? Because after that, because what you find a number of times, you have those challenges. The people who you're with don't understand those challenges. And sometimes what they say add fuel to the fire before you can even adequately deal with your issue.
Yeah.
What would be the best way, the best method forward for persons going through that kind of you know psychological turmoil, if you might call it that?
Yeah. And I love my metaphors. So I'm going to throw another metaphor in there. But
Mm.
what you're describing, the kind of traumatic memories, is what we can liken that to is kind of like getting a big cut on your arm. And it's gonna keep bothering you if you don't go in there and like clean out the wound and then maybe give it like a band-aid, give it time to like heal up. That's kind of what traumatic memories are like. They're like this deep wound that hasn't been healed. Um, now, the best way, and I am very biased, is obviously going to be therapy. It really helps to have another person, but ideally a mental health professional, walking you through those traumatic memories because they're painful. They're painful, and our self-preservation instinct, the first thing we're going to want to do is avoid them as much as possible. Avoiding them is actually the worst thing you can do. You need to experience it. So in my bio, I talked about processing those traumatic memories, and what that could look like is making sure that you equip yourself with enough coping mechanisms, like healthy coping mechanisms, to not like smoking a spliff every day, but more like along those lines of what Anthony was talking about a little bit earlier. Maybe not going out to the environment, taking in the environment, exercising. Those long-term routines are going to help to build resilience. We're also going to need probably coping tools that help you to ground yourself in the moment when those traumatic memories stir up a lot of stuff that's been going on in you from earlier on. So once you get those skills, and those skills could look like, really focusing in on your breathing, really focusing in on experiencing what your body feels when you think of those traumatic responses, experiencing what your mind is thinking when you're having those traumatic responses, experiencing what you're feeling emotionally and what you do behaviorally. So whether that looks like maybe, you get tense and you start bouncing and those things like that. You want to cultivate an awareness of those kinds of things, of what your body reacts with when it thinks of those painful memories. And then you want to go back in, and you have to re-experience or just go back in and think about these traumatic memories. That's why it helps to have an outside party. But you have to think about it, kind of analyze it, like really, because what will happen is that trauma will happen, and then that memory that you have of the trauma kind of gets frozen in what we sometimes call trauma time. And because of that, your body is no longer able to process those memories. So I know maybe you have a positive memory in your life, and every time you think of that positive memory, the effects that it has on you maybe get a little bit less because you move further and further away from that positive memory. And it's still positive, but the reaction isn't as visceral for you. With traumatic memories, the reaction stays as visceral. So you need to go in and expose yourself to that memory, pull it back into your short-term memory, kind of process it a little bit, get all those reactions out as much as you can, as much as you can bear, as much as what's within what we call your window of tolerance. Put it back into your long-term, give yourself some rest, kind of readjust yourself, get back centered, and kind of just it's a process of just readying up yourself, going to investigate that memory, readying up yourself, going to investigate that memory, and doing that so that each time you do it, it becomes a little bit less intense. It becomes a little bit less distressing, and you kind of get the tools to know what to do when it does come up. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, so you have to revisit, ready up and revisit. Okay.
Yeah, and that could look as simple as maybe just writing about the traumatic experience and then looking at it from as many different angles as possible, whether that's your body, your emotion, your thoughts, or your just behavioral reactions. And that's a good place to start.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Anybody else? Sir Paul? Sir Morgan? I don't want to hog all the questions, you know. You see, you guys not asking all the questions. Mr. Prince asking all these questions. There's a thing called, well, I read something recently that they call it positive psychology, right? I'm in the college environment, education, and therefore we have to interface with students from time to time. So I've been reading, just to find ways to interact and interface with my students. So positive psychology is something that I've always been looking at, you know. So to employ some of the strategies that I would have learned and so on. But in my mind, sometimes in dealing with people, what I find that although they call it positive psychology, very often you really need to refer persons. So people come to you like at a starting point, and they really just want to bounce things off you. And if you're not prepared for that, then you really have to refer them to a psychologist, you know, for psychotherapy. Is there anything though that we can do, that we as in a collective, that could improve our awareness and our response to persons who are those challenged? And what I find too is when you have to refer persons to areas that don't have a stigma. So for example, I find that we have been referring person like to Bellevue, and from people at Bellevue, they don't want to go again. You know? Like we need some time. So we really when a person will say, okay, you know, we have a psychologist available at Bellevue. Oh my God, you them not turn up. They not come back and note.
Yeah.
That kind of thing, you know. The coach have called me like a million times. Have you seen that person? Yeah, but we have referred them 2 or 3 or 4 times. But if I mention Bellevue, they must take with themselves. But how do we kind of normalize? How do we normalize mental health? Talking about mental health in the space that we are, and sometimes in public too, because every time someone mental health, people think that man is mad, like the man is mad, or the man is, you know, bust a blood vessel, or you know, liquor chip. But the fact of the matter is, mental health is so much more. It is so much more than just that. It is. And we take it for granted, you know. It's like we just take it for granted, you know. Like when you look at all them men in the bar, like some man that drink, when you can say a man drink almost all a quart buckle of white rum, you know, say that's a normal, you know what I mean? Because being drunk, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That is more than drunk, and like frost, you know what I mean? That's like, yo, brother, why you don't put yourself through all of that? You know, so it is more than just the thing that we think. Because we think a man drink some white rum like that is normal, but the bottom line is not normal, because what it does to him at the end. And then you go through all that process time and time again. How do we do? How can we contribute to normalizing the discussion on mental health, particularly among men in the public space?
That is a loaded question. I wish I had the whole answer, but I feel like I maybe have a partial answer, something like that.
Well, give me a B-side. Just give me a B-side. Come on, just want to start. We have to start somewhere.
You have to. And I think one time, whenever people ask me, like, how do you be there for a friend? That's generally where you want to start. And the first thing is always to validate. So if I'm in a therapy session and somebody tells me something, the first thing I'm going to do is validate what they said. I'm going to try and show them that I understand that they might be struggling. I understand, or not even struggling. I understand that they might be happy. You kind of want to make sure that the person knows that their feelings are welcome. So that's kind of what we need to do as a society: make a environment where we can validate the struggles that people are going on with. So, kind of just curbing that knee-jerk reaction of, oh, no, nah, that's not real. That's not going on. You're exaggerating. Those kinds of things. It's kind of just, you need to pause, validate, and just really listen to what the person is saying. But that's really only half of the battle. I think there's going to have to be a big thing around kind of what Anthony had mentioned, where it's just like, you need to make sure that we're having these conversations. So if you're not having, you need to validate when the conversations come up, yes, but you still need to consider these things. So it's a case where if maybe you have a student and the student is saying they weren't able to complete an assignment because they were depressed or something like that, in order to normalize something like that, you need to give it weight. You need to do your research on it and realize it is a real thing, and not belittle people for the experiences they're having, but also just let them know that it's okay to struggle and have those experiences. I think that between those two, that's going to be a pretty big way to kind of go about it, but also like getting as much information that we can about the most common disorders. So just something as simple as what depression looks like and what anxiety looks like. Those are two of the most common things, and just kind of starting there it's a pretty strong place, and it's going to get a lot of ground cover.
All right. Okay, we have just a few more minutes. We're actually wrapping up. Any other question? No more questions. I'm looking. More people look at them rather watch this on YouTube than come on and talk. We're in StreamYard. You need to be here to type your questions. But again, I just want to thank you. You have opened my eyes and my appetite for learning some more stuff, and for just kind of having that kind of conversation. Because when men, we should be having a men's summit sometime in the near future, and this would be something that we need to sit down and talk about. I know very often, men must be strong. Men must be strong, and yes, we must not have problems. Must be problem solvers. We are men, But
yes.
Yeah, but that in of itself sometimes hide some of the issues that we have been through. And to be quite frank, some of those issues are impacting on our relationships presently. We do have our cyclical issues, women with menopause, men with andropause, but outside that, we do have issues, sometimes coming from far back as when we were younger, and those issues, when they come up in this older age, we're still not ready to deal with it. But again, you have given us some tips on how we can approach it. The fact that we need to situate it right there in the present and look at it and that kind of thing. In my mind, I was just thinking that we should move in that direction. There's something we just need to talk about. Them painful, we just need to talk about them. Yeah. And if we been talk about them 2 or 3 or 4 times, we just need to talk about them until them just don't have that kind of pain anymore. Don't have that kind of power. I see Anthony there with a question. Well, our statement.
Yeah, Anthony is asking, when it pertains to misconceptions about therapy, what are you going to say to somebody to encourage them to take the next step, especially if they're on that fence about seeking therapy? That's a good one. I'm going to start off with the second question you asked, actually, and because your follow-up was, what are some misconceptions about therapy and they're encountered? One of the big ones is kind of one that I touched on a little bit earlier, and I did that intentionally, where people think that spirituality is kind of the opposite of therapy, and it's like, no, they can work hand in hand, and you're not betraying your spirituality, you're not betraying your faith if you ask for a little bit of help. That's fine. When it comes to people who are on the fence about therapy, it really is just, if you have a problem, and you don't even necessarily have to have a problem, you could just have an interest. But if you have an issue that you want to deal with, you want to attack it from all angles possible. You owe it to yourself to do as much as possible to get over any hurdles that you have, or to just go about being the best version of yourself that you can. I think that going in service of that is really one of the best ways to get people to kind of get over that fence. It's a loaded question, and it's kind of hard to get into like an in-depth answer when we only have 2 minutes left. But for sure, I think kind of that motivation of you owe it to yourself to be as healthy as possible, to gain that mental health, and to just make sure that you're suffering the least and that you have perspective on your life. I think therapy really, it's another person just pointing out areas in your life that maybe you want to improve based on your own goals, because you do go into therapy, you do set your own agenda with your therapist. And I think that having that partnership, having that collaboration, having that therapeutic alliance is what we call it, with a mental health professional who knows the order of your mind. Well, not your mind, but minds in general, like the back of your hand, combined with the expertise that you have of your own self. That's almost an unstoppable combination that's definitely going to help you to make magnificent changes in your life. And if that's something that you're seeking, something that you're after, I do think that therapy is one of the greatest avenues to get that done through. Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Nesbitt. You know, we're looking forward. I don't even know. I know you're such a busy man, to be honest. And I know you're a man who set the goals and you're doing things. You know, really looking forward. You know, yeah, man. At some point,
Yeah.
I know you'll have your own practice, and probably you
Yeah.
might see some of us, the older folks. So you know, that time you might not be as young as you are now. So
Yeah.
it was easier for us to sit down and have that discussion. But we want to
Yeah.
thank you so much, Mr. Nesbitt. Thank you for taking
Pleasure as well.
you know time out of your busy schedule just to be here with us. You know, as I said, some of the men might be on other platforms. Because we try and stream it on these other platforms so we can provide them with the kind of answer and you know involvement that we know exists. A
Yeah.
number of the persons on this line are Christian men, you know, and so their minds are in one place. And I'm happy how you would have responded in particular, because in truth and in fact, some people feel say the therapy and the Christianity is diametrically opposed. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's you know, but they're really not. You know, um, and you have given us some perspective on some of the issues that we are facing presently and currently. You know, it's absolutely fantastic having you. You know, well, if we were together, I'd offer you a drink, you know, probably a glass of wine or something. Nothing to smoke. Yeah. But I just want to thank you, and I want to thank you on behalf of the men. Yes, the men of Man Cave. You know what I mean?
Yes.
That's so funny, you know, the men of the Man Cave.
Yes.
Um, just want to thank you for just the time and you know just sharing your expertise with us.
Of course.
You'd have given us more than just food for thought. There are some nuggets in there that we need. We can actually start practicing to
Yes.
evaluate and so on our own condition. And of course, we will not be afraid to step up. So we might come knock on the door because we might need some psychotherapy. And of course, you might
No
be the
problem.
person who would have delivered that.
Yeah.
So we thank you again. You know, there's so much more. So probably again we have to negotiate another time. But it
Probably.
was
Yeah.
wonderful to have you. You know,
Of course.
there
It
are
was
other
wonderful.
issues that we're facing, and there are other issues that will come up. And hopefully in the near future, or you know, not so distant future, we
Yeah.
will yeah, we'll be able to touch back this again. You, I
I can
wanted
feel
to I wanted to tell the men though where they can find you if they need your services or the services of the person with whom you are now working. Because
that.
that's
Yes.
also important for them to be able to find. Because you know, sometimes, and I don't want to talk too much, but the government have these call, the situation you can call, but whereas they might get a few calls, I think there's so much more that could be done if persons didn't have that kind of stigma for the public, you know, kind of fora. Yeah. So
Yes.
yes, let them know where they can find it if they need to find it.
No problem. And I looked down for a few seconds there to find the number so I can make
You
sure I'm
know.
getting everything right. But currently, I work mainly with Dr. Kai A.D. Morgan and Associates. I'm working as a clinical intern there. And you can Google that. So Dr. Kai A.D. Morgan and Associates. I think it's in the on your site here. It's in the little summary that you had
Yes.
under this podcast. You can Google that and it will come up. You can also call 876 869 765, and that will put you in touch with the office assistant. You can ask for me, Christopher Nesbeth, or you can ask for another therapist because there are a group of us there. And yeah, just from there, you can get like a consultation, you can get assessments done, you can get therapy done. That's kind of where I'm working out of right now. And we offer quite a few services and different practitioners. So someone there for everyone.
All right, I appreciate that, sir. Appreciate that much.
Of
Ladies
course.
and well, not ladies, gentlemen. Yes. We might have some wives listening in because wives are like that. Wives are listening to the man cave. I was told this. I was told today. Listen, we listen to what do we talk about today? So the wife, so wife is your husband.
That's good. That's
But
fine.
that's fine with us too. But you have heard it, Mr. Nesbitt, clinical psychologist, and a man who we're looking forward um, to see in the near future, with greater
Of course.
achievements and so on. And of course,
Yeah.
the area of study that he's focusing on is very, 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 very important. Jamaican men and Jamaican children, Caribbean children in particular, have gone through serious trauma. Yes, and we had almost normalized it. Yeah, but the
Hmm.
fact of the matter is, sometimes it does come back to bite us. So that's a good era, very good era for him to be
Thank you.
finalizing this thing in. And we just want to ask God blessing upon him. Thank you so much, Sir Nesbeth. Thank you so much for
Thank you for
being
having me.
here.
Yes,
Thank you, my good sir. Every
of course.
blessing and every good success be yours.
Thank you.
Yes.
And same to you and this great podcast.
We're trying. We're trying. We're trying.
Yeah,
Yes.
of course.
Okay, man. We just want to give you a little round up. Last week we did look at some of the issue of how do you prepare for relationship. We say that it's not a willy-nilly thing. It's something that you need to plan. It's something that you need to, work through. You know what I mean? And making it, how we need to make it. So the whole issue of budgeting, the whole issue of planning your way through. You can't get married and you don't have a plan. No, don't ever get married and don't have a plan. That's a recipe for disaster. Um, and so we look forward to you just working through some of those things. The fact of the matter is, just like how you go to school to learn, to further your career and the issues in that. I want you to do the same approach. If you are seeking a wife, if you're having a relationship and you're planning to get married, do the same kind of research. Get deep into the thing. um yeah, and you're not going to do like a police, but you need to find a way. You need to find a way to find out about the person who you want to spend the rest of your life with, and you can't take that light. Just like when you never take your career light, you can't take your relationship light. And therefore you should, yes, for whatever reason, you should take the time to find out, what are the things that make the woman tick, what are her likes, her dislikes, and so on and so forth. You need to take that serious into consideration. And well, if the women were here, they tell them the same thing too. Because we need to understand each other if we're going to spend the rest of our lives together. And although some people say them fall in love, I tell you be careful, because when you're falling in love, hurt yourself. Nevertheless, if you decide to enter into a relationship and you think that you have things in common, you're compatible, then you can go ahead and make the plans and decide to stick with what you want to stick with. One thing I never looked at last week, but I really wanted us both to have you quickly is, and I learned this from a sexologist, right? A noted sexologist. She said one of the things that we need to do when we enter into a relationship is to define define clearly the kind of relationship that we want to be in. And I was a little bit challenged when she said that originally. I was like, what you mean by that? And I was like, hmm, what you mean? Um, but it is necessary, because in the new dispensation you do have different kinds of cohabitation. Yes, you do have situations where persons are together exclusively. I was told that this is one we are used to, the exclusive thing. You have the one that you're not exclusive, you're one off. You have the kind of relationship combination where persons are trisexual, bisexual, and all these things. Yet still, they might have some feelings for you and they want to be in a relationship with you too. So there are a number of configurations, some of which I don't remember and never want to remember, that have impacted on how we have relationship. Yes. And therefore we need to be very clear when we are starting relationships. We need to be very clear. We need to define exactly what is it that we're getting involved in. That must be clear. There must be no ambiguity to that. And then we can move forward on that to make it work. Yes? So those are some of the issues that we looked at last week. This is something that I've introduced new. And we will continue next week with some of those issues so that we may have a full appreciation of how we're going to move forward. And as men, how we're going to fulfill our role and purpose. Let me just recap with that quote from Emotions. And that is a book that I think everybody should probably get. Yes. Where is my quote? My quote seems to have run away, but I'll find it nevertheless. It's not going anywhere too far. Yes. That is something that we should, emotions. We should get. We need to start reading more, men. We need to start reading more. That's one of the things that we had suggested. That we got to start reading, man. That's important. That's one of the way that we will. I can't. I don't have it as a hardcover book. It's actually a download. But it's Emotion by T.D. Jakes. Let me see if I can bring up a picture of it. Let me see. It's downloaded. It's downloaded. Okay, let me see if I can go to my downloads. Yes. Yeah. Emotions. All right. Let me see if I can pick up this picture. All right. This is it. I hope you can see it good. That's what the book look like. That's Emotions by T.D. Jakes. Very powerful book. Yes. This is a book that all of us should read. All of us should read this book. It basically situates us in where we are right now as men, older men, younger men. Look at a number of areas that we can easily and quickly understand. And it allows for us to have the kind of conversations that is necessary for us to move forward, which is so important. I'm trying to find the quote. Yes. I'm so happy that Mr. Nesbitt was able. Here's the quote. Yes, that Mr. Nesbitt was able to share with us. And please, you will find a number of the important tips that he would have given us if you go back to watch the episode. A number of them were put up by our tech team, and we hope that you have made some notes. It's important that we use everything at our disposal in order to ensure, in order to evaluate, in order to look at and examine our own mental health situation, and of course move forward. Yes, because we have to move forward. Jamaica has to move forward, and we as the family unit have to move forward, and therefore it means that we need to be firing on all cylinders. It's important that we fire on all cylinders. Again, we just want to tag the 9 symptoms of depression: loss of interest, sadness, weight loss, insomnia, suicidal thoughts, isolation, not having the energy to clean the environment. Yeah, so those are the manifestations and symptoms. So if you're experiencing any one of those symptoms, I would suggest that you get checked. Yes, because we don't want to lose any man. We don't want to lose any man to any one of those hyper negative disposition. Yes, we have had enough of those persons killing self and family and everybody else. We have had enough of those. And as men of the cave, we want to ensure that we are in the best of health and that we are doing all that we need to do in order to make it. Let me read this quote for you. Why are so many Christian men so frustrated? That's a question. It is exactly because God has set eternity in our hearts, and we have a built-in sense that life does have meaning. And our frustration is that we have not yet found it. We don't have enough religion to make us happy men as we look in the mirror, but we have enough to remind us how unhappy we have become. Is it easy to remember that you're unhappy? Sadness, them say sadness and misery like company. And so it is. And I'm going to give you a next quote. For many men, one striking and far-reaching consequence of a mal-socialization ordeal is an inability to differentiate and identify their emotions. The technical term for this condition is Alexithymic, Alexithymic. I won't even try to pronounce. I might bite my tongue, but I would have spelled it. You can look it up. Alexithymic. That's a condition. That's a technical term. Come from a Greek root that means without. Yes, words and emotion. People with that kind of thing cannot put their feelings into words and are often not even aware of them. And this we spoke about this, Mr. Nesbitt spoke about this. Yes, when we're being too scrambled, we don't want to talk, we can't talk, we can't even put them into words. And therefore sometimes we become angry, irritable, we hit out, we become very hyper aggressive, you know, because that now mixed with testosterone and everything else that makes you the man that you are. And of course the end result is usually something that we don't necessarily want. So therefore, we need to take care of our mental health. It's very, very important. Jamaica need to take mental health, and in particular men's mental health, into consideration, and ensure that we make them aware of this. Thank you again. It has been a wonderful afternoon on the Man Cave. And of course, we didn't see much of our men on this particular platform, but we know that they were out there somewhere. Some will, of course, look back at the episode, and we hope that you will be able to glean something from the episode, and that you'll be able not just to glean it, but able to use some of the simple solutions that Mr. Nesbitt suggested that we use in order to become better aware and, of course, address some of the mental issues that we have. Thank you again, Mr. Nesbitt, for being here. Thank you, men of the cave, for being here. Thank you, Tech Team, for your wonderful assistance. And thank you for us allowing us in your space today. Bless. Oops. Next week, 4 o'clock, same time, same place. Man Cave. Real talk. Real talk. Real men. Real issues. We're about to address those. Bless you.